All right, let's go ahead and get started this morning. Don't forget that the revision of your philosophy and ministry paper is due tomorrow, so make sure to do that. Again, hopefully you've been able to look at the comments from the first paper. If not, please let me know so that you can make sure to revise in light of those comments. And then the final is a week from today at 8 o'clock in this room. So you have about a week after our class today. I'm sure you probably have other finals in between there, but if you do have any questions, anything comes up between now and then, feel free to get in contact with me. Try to keep the grades updated and get the philosophy and ministry essays graded as quickly as I can once they're all submitted, so you have an idea of what you need to do on the final in order to get what you're hoping to get in the class. Very close to reaching the 85% threshold for the extra 15 points for the evaluations. I think for the face-to-face class, we need one more person. There's two that haven't finished it, but we need one more. I don't know who those are, so I can't tell you who to pressure to complete the evaluation. But like I said, there's one more, and I think there's for the online class, if two more people finish, and they'll reach that goal as well. So very close, excuse me, to getting the extra points for the final for the evaluations. So if you haven't completed that evaluation, please let me know. I did send an email to those that haven't completed it. Again, I don't know who. It just I was able to click on a button that said send an email to those that haven't completed it. So you should have received an email if you haven't completed it yet. And then, as I've mentioned before, I don't see those results for the evaluations until after the grades have been submitted. In fact, it's a day or two after they've been submitted before they're available. Basically, what I want to do today is help you focus on some specific things related to the final, really emphasize some things that I want you to pay attention to. Remember, there will be one section on the final that is material from the midterm to this point. That is the list of information on the study guide, the list of terms. That will be the multiple choice and the short answer section. And then there will be essentially two essay questions that form a bulk of the material, or a bulk of the writing for the assignment. The first, so I'll kind of be going backwards, starting with the essay and then talking about the research description and then some other things related to the multiple choice short answer identification. So the essay for the final that you'll need to write is this one that's up there. It's available in the study guide, so you don't have to get it down. But I wanted to go through and work through together some things to highlight in thinking about how you go about answering this question. Now, some of this was part of it's very similar to the essay question that was one of the essay questions that was on the midterm. But obviously, I'm looking for you to have a broader scope now that you've gone through the course. You've had more to investigate, think about, read about, and so looking for that inclusion as well. So, starting off first, what is biblical studies? In thinking about answering that, it doesn't take much to answer that question. Very simple, brief sentence, maybe two. But there are a couple of things that I'm looking for in that sentence. First, that you emphasize that it's an academic field. So, different biblical studies as a field is different than Bible study in a church. Right? So, talking about an academic field or a field of scholarship or something to that standpoint, right? So you're kind of distinguishing it from personal Bible study that you might do at a church or with a group of friends. And so making that clear is a very important part of that. And then, a variety of other things could be fit into that discussion, but pay attention to that one section. As before, with the essay questions, it's very important to answer all parts of the question. So that's part of why I'm going through this, is to help, situate in your mind, okay, what are the parts of the question that I need to answer. So, what is biblical studies? Sentence maybe two, general, emphasizing it's an academic field, distinguishing it from Bible study is an important part of the second one. In talking about Bible study, right, or biblical studies, after you've answered that, then I want you to briefly identify other related fields or the different fields within biblical studies. So, what are some areas or some fields within biblical studies that you think should be included in that answer?
Historical and practical.
All right, so you talk about the different types of field, like the church history, the ministerial types of study, but also theology would be a field in there. And so the different types of theology: systematic theology, historical theology, biblical theology, and practical theology, including that information with brief descriptions. All right, so in the answer, you want to start off with a general, what biblical studies is, emphasizing an academic field. Then briefly talk about biblical studies proper, and dealing with the text. History, theology, ministry, and briefly describing each of those. So how is this academic field different from Bible study in the life of a Christian community, right? So a Sunday school, the home group, life group, something like that. How would you say biblical studies as a field is different from Bible study that you might do in a church? What would be something that you could say?
I guess like a Bible study, it's more like how can I apply this to my life, and then like biblical studies is kind of like things that's more almost like scientifically, kind of just you're trying to figure out what does this really mean.
Okay, that might be a way to approach it. I mean, that's certainly not the only way, but a way to approach it might be more the difference between kind of personal life application versus more systematic, scientific, objective type of approach, right? In terms of the kind of objective look at the text, what's the meaning of the text. And so one way might be to talk about the difference between personal application. How might be another way? I mean, again, that's a good way, and if you decide that's the way you want to go, that's fine. But there are other options as well. What are some other ways you would distinguish between Bible study on a personal or congregational level versus biblical studies?
Biblical studies is solely research.
Okay.
And Bible study at a church would not be really research.
Okay, so the kind of approach you would take to it in the sense of, biblical studies has conventions of research, right, that we've talked about, where, maybe the teacher's doing some of that if they're leading the discussion of Bible study, but that's not something everybody in the class would be engaged in, and there would be more of a face value type of approach. So that might be another route that you could go. So there's a couple of different things that you could say there, but that's the kind of thing I'm looking for. So make sure to say something about the distinction between Bible study and biblical study. Now, we're shifting here, kind of getting in more to connecting Bible study to the life of the Christian community by going through the process of theological reflection. And so you have to go back and look those things related to Stone and Duke, and thinking about deliberative theology versus embedded theology, thinking about the different sources for theological reflection, and so Scripture, community, reason, tradition. I almost forgot myself. All right, so going back, looking at those four, talking about some of those things related to exegesis of the text, and talking about some application of the text. All right, so we've had just general description of biblical studies, discussion of the field, a sentence or two. Again, not looking for a lot in any of these, but just make sure to include all those. Right, the difference between Bible study and biblical studies. This one probably you need 3 or 4 sentences maybe, in that you're going to kind of talk about the sources. Right, so Scripture, tradition, reason, community. You're going to talk about embedded theology, deliberative theology. Again, just brief. Right? Investigating the embedded theology of a group, deliberative, discussions, those kind of things. Now, what is the role of theological reflection in the life of the church, and how does biblical studies inform this theological reflection? Probably a sentence or two. But what would you say is the role of theological reflection in the life of the church? Why should churches engage in theological reflection? There's a couple different ways you could answer this. I wouldn't say that there's necessarily one right answer.
You get stuck in tradition, or just follow whatever the last generation did.
Okay, so you're not getting stagnant, not getting stuck in the tradition. Maybe try to keep the life of the community vibrant. The reflection of what our spiritual ancestors believe in, is that actually viable in contemporary society? Is it scriptural? Does it reflect what God wants us to do? Any other ideas? Maybe saying something about, the churches are going to encounter new situations in every generation, and so the church needs to respond to those in a deliberative manner. That might be another way. How does biblical studies inform theological reflection? What contribution does this field make to that process?
Interpretation.
Okay. Providing maybe some guidelines for interpretation. What else? Again, this is one where you could have a variety of answers. What else does biblical studies do that you maybe say something like, that it helps make sure that the text is understood properly, or providing a pattern or guidelines for encountering the text. How do biblical studies and ministry relate to each other? Again, very similar types of things. Essentially these two questions you could probably answer in one sentence, and that the importance of ministry, or importance of biblical studies in the life of the ministry, right? as well as the ways in which existing or living and practicing ministry also make sure that we don't end up just in a very dry, lifeless mode. Right? Biblical studies can be very spiritually passionless. Right? You can get in this rut of like very dry looking at the text, and you're trying to do it objectively and don't get to that point of personal reflection and what does this mean in my personal life. Right? And so those two can kind of work together to make sure that doesn't happen while also providing a good foundation. Specific examples are also very helpful. Right? And so anywhere you can put in a specific example. For example, in the question about the role of theological reflection, you might say, for example, if a church was trying to decide whether or not to develop a homeless ministry or a clothes closet, so anytime you can incorporate specific examples in any of these things, that would be a very important and added part of this. So in your essay, right, these are the things you want to make sure to cover. The field of biblical studies, the related fields, as well as what they are, a difference between Bible study and biblical studies, theological reflection, the process, how it enriches the life of the church, right, how the two relate, and then how ministry and biblical studies relate. And so make sure to cover all of those in your response. Questions about the essay? Anything we need to explain or clarify? All right, so a sizable part of the grade for the final will be from that essay. So, really think about that over the next week. Try to develop some things to say. Certainly, you're not going to be allowed to sit there and copy something you've written. But if you want to run some ideas by me, like if I said this, would that work? Feel free to do that over the next week. But again, once you sit down to write, you have to write from memory or from the thoughts you have right then. The second major part of the final is a description of the research process related to a specific biblical text. So essentially what's going to happen is I'm going to give you a text. Now it's not going to be a long text, but it's going to be similar to what you had to do for your research paper. It's going to be one of the texts that nobody chose. That way nobody has an advantage. So I had to go back and revise because last time I taught this, somebody chose that text as the research paper. So I was like, okay, I need to think of a new text. Right? So I will give you a text. I will give you the major interpretations of that text. And then what I will expect you to do is to describe for me how you would go about researching and producing a paper related to that text. Now, that does not mean I'm wanting you to do a mini research paper and saying, develop a mini research paper. Instead, what I'm looking for you is to describe the steps that you would take to write that research paper. And so it's describing the process rather than producing a paper like you did for the research paper. In doing that, there are some things to remember, and some of these could be questions in the multiple choice section. So remembering, going back over that, what is research? There were several points we made about what research is versus what research isn't. But essentially, these four aspects are important. Right? Collecting the data, analyzing data, interpreting data, and then synthesizing that data into a research paper. And so you could be asked a variety of questions on the final related to what research is. So, for example, you might be asked something like, what is it that makes something research? Right? Something along those lines. And being given a list of things like finding hard to find data, gathering a lot of data, interpreting that data, right? And so a multiple choice question, where the answer would be, what makes something research is not just that it's hard to find, not that you've gathered a lot of information, it's the interpretation of that data that makes something research. Okay? All right, so you might get a question like that. So you might get a question like, what makes something research? Collecting data, hard to find data, interpreting data. So it would be a really good question to ask. What would make something research? And the answer would be interpreting data. Everybody get one? If you find somebody that's clueless, help them out, all right? So interpretation of data could be a question, maybe, possibly, on the exam. And so you'd want to say interpretation of data. Does everybody get it? Hopefully, everybody gets what's going on. You would also need to, as far as that research description, think about that process of developing the research question, identifying the research problem, discovering your data, organizing your data, interpreting your data, and then developing an argument. So essentially, not only could you have a question or a set of questions related to that, but this is essentially what you want to think about in writing that research description on that passage. So in thinking about it, all right, here's this passage of Scripture I've given you. And I'll give you the possible interpretations. Right? And these are the three major interpretations of this passage. In that research description section, this is what I want you to do. So I'm going to give you, like I said, I'm going to give you the passage and the possible interpretations. You should be able to talk about, right, one of the first things you're going to do is develop your research question, right, which is related to the passage. So I'm going to essentially tell you, here's the problem with this passage. Where if like for your research paper, you had to discover what the problem was in your passage. I'm going to tell you what the problem is. But essentially, you would want to talk about, developing the problem, asking the question. And so, what does this mean? Or, for example, Garen's passage, Mark 16. Does it belong in the passage? Right. So you should have some sort of statement of, here's the problem with this text. All right. I'll tell you what it is, but in writing your response, you should include identifying the problem. Then talk about finding your sources. So you should talk about, now that I've developed this problem, or now I have this question, I'm going to be looking for this information. Commentaries, journal articles, other types of sources. What are the things you're going to look for? And specifically said, what I'm looking for you to say is, then I would look for commentaries about this passage, I would look for journal articles about this passage, I might look for websites about this passage, right? And so listing out, this is the very important part of this section of the paper, or the final, is specifics. Right? And so what types of sources are you looking for? You can talk about, I might look at an encyclopedia about this passage, if it's appropriate, those kind of things. Bible dictionary. Where are you going to look for these sources? So in your writing, you want to write, I'm looking for commentaries, I'm looking for journal articles, I'm going to look for this information in the library catalog. I am going to look at this information in an academic database. I'm going to look for this information on Google Scholar. So specifics. Now again, I don't necessarily expect you to say, like if I give you, this isn't passage, but let's say it's Psalms 137. And the problem is, the end of the passage talks about, O Babylon, happy are those who take your children and bash their heads against the rocks. That's legitimately Psalm 137. Right? And so the problem is, how can you say something like this, right? How could God allow something like this? And so I'd be looking for commentaries on Psalms. Right? I'm not expecting you to talk about specific commentaries on Psalms. I want you to say commentaries on Psalms. I'm looking for journal articles on Psalm 137. I'm going to look in the catalog, the library catalog, for commentaries on Psalms. I'm going to look in academic databases for articles on Psalm 137. That's the kind of thing I'm looking for you to write in your paper, right? Those specifics. Talking about how do I go about evaluating those sources that I find. Right? Remembering those criteria, the author, the audience, what sources did they use, the accuracy. So again, I know when you hit the question on the final, it might seem overwhelming, or thinking about how it's presented on the study guide might be overwhelming. But I'm looking for nothing more than for you to say. Once I have sources, commentaries, journal articles, I'm going to evaluate them based on who's the author, what are the author's credentials, is it meant for a scholarly audience, what kind of sources do they use, is it accurate? Again, the specifics. Everybody with me so far? Any of those areas we need to clarify? Then I would read my sources and take notes on them. By paying attention to, right? And so what would be the things you would pay attention to? The arguments, the evidence being used, things specifically related to my passage. Those would be the kind of things that you would say. And then the last part of this section would include how you would go about developing the paper and argument. Now, you wouldn't necessarily have to make an argument. I'm not looking for you to write a research paper, but you would say things like, I would organize my notes according to the various interpretations. And I would develop a thesis statement that laid out my argument. And things like that. So how would you actually go about writing your paper? Again, you don't necessarily have to take an argument and say, I believe that this interpretation is correct. You don't have to do that. But what I'm looking for you to do is to say, I would, having paid attention to the notes, I would organize them in this way, and then I would produce a paper that had a strong thesis statement that laid out the argument and provided the evidence. Again, the focus is on the process, not so much the actual things you would say, right? The actual wording or anything you would say. If appropriate, you don't have to, but if appropriate, you might have a section talking about avoiding pitfalls, right? And thinking about, here are some areas where I might have some trouble. Making sure my argument is clear, paying attention to grammar. If you want to include something about that, if it seems appropriate, that's fine. I'm not necessarily looking for it. But that might be the other thing that you would think about. With respect to this research description, right? So that's that second chunk of the final exam. But all of those things could be multiple choice questions, right? So you could, or a short answer. Short answer question might be, why is note-taking important? And so, you would talk about note-taking in your research description, But then you would also want to talk about why note-taking is important. And so all of those things that we've been talking about are those terms in that first section. So why is note-taking important? What would be a reason why note-taking would be important?
It helps you organize your thoughts.
Okay, it helps you organize your thoughts. Helps you remember where you got your information from. Again, there's a variety of things you could say to that, but that could be one of the short answer questions. It would be a good short answer question to ask. Why is note-taking important? And then, other things like in evaluating a source, which of the following would you consider author, who it was published by? That one, I don't have a well-developed question on that, but that could be a question. Any questions about the paper development process? Anything we need to... Everybody clear on what I'm going to want you to talk about? Other things to pay attention to. This is getting more into the multiple choice section, the short answer section. Very similar questions to what we had on the midterm. And so you'll see, like I said, short answer, multiple choice questions. One would be the characteristics of research thinking. Specifically, we had a slide during the lecture. These would be the characteristics of research thinking. All of the lectures are available on YouTube. I have a link, I believe, on Blackboard. So if you need to go back and review any of those lectures, including this one, it'll be available later today. And they are in 15 to 25-minute chunks, so you can you don't have to watch the entire hour to try and get the information you're looking for. So these are the characteristics. You would want to know those. You would want to know and be able to talk about the difference between quantitative and qualitative research. So there might be a question that is just simply, what is the difference between quantitative and qualitative research? Or there could be a question as to which of the following would be an example of quantitative research. So either one of those would be a possibility. Essentially, with quantitative, what you would want to look for, if it were a multiple choice question, you would want to look for the one that said something about numbers or statistics, something along that line. So qualitative has to do more with qualities, and quantitative has to do more with quantities. So it's more about numbers. So knowing the difference between those two. Knowing the difference between inductive and deductive reasoning. So again, there could be a short answer question that asks what deductive reasoning is. There could be a multiple choice question that either gave you an example of reasoning and said which is inductive or deductive reasoning, or might say which of the following processes is an inductive research. So there's a couple of different ways that you could see that question, but if you know the difference. Inductive is looking at specific examples, drawing a general principle. Deductive is starting with a general principle, drawing conclusions from that. So the syllogism. All people are mortal, Socrates is a person, Socrates is mortal. So that's the deductive. You should know the various methods in biblical studies. specifically looking at the 5 different types of research that we talked about. So here too could be a short answer question, describe content analysis research. Or a question of which of the following would be an exegetical research project, in which I might give you an example that would be like more historical, an example that would be theological, ministerial, and then one that would be exegetical, that would be specifically about the original meaning of the biblical text. All right, now so I'll give you those 4 and say which of the following is exegetical, an exegetical type. So again, if you know what the different types are, you should be able to either describe it or identify an example. At any point we're going through all this, stop me if you have questions or if there's something that you don't understand or if we need to describe something. With respect to academic integrity and plagiarism, 2 things you should be able to do is talk about the importance of academic integrity. Why is it important? And then also what makes something plagiarism or not. So there could be a question, a short answer question that would be simply something like, what is plagiarism? It could be a question of which of the following would not be plagiarism. Right? And so something like using information without citation, directly copying somebody's works, identifying something that's common knowledge, and then something else, because usually there's 4. And so which of those isn't plagiarism? Well, it's not plagiarism if it is common knowledge. And George Washington is the first president of the United States. The earth revolves around the sun. And to write those things is not plagiarism, even if it is exactly worded, right? By somebody else, right? Where you could find somebody that exactly said George Washington was the first president. It's common knowledge. And so knowing, what are the things that make something plagiarism and what is not plagiarism. A big thing to pay attention to. It's not going to be a sizable part of the exam, but having down the citation styles and being able to do an example is very important. This was a challenge for quite a few of you on the research papers, which are graded. You should be able to go back and look at your grades. I did not get into specifics. So I didn't mark specific grammatical errors. I didn't mark citation errors. If you had something that was consistently wrong, I identified that in my comments. If you would like an annotated copy of your paper, meaning I mark all the wrong commas, places where there was awkward wording, those kind of things, and the citations, let me know. I will get that to you. But most people don't want that, so I didn't really include all that. So if you have questions about that or want me to provide you with better information, let me know. But there will be questions on the final, not a lot, but there will be questions where I will give you information about a source and ask you to provide me the bibliographic citation, or I might ask you to provide me the short citation. I might ask you to provide a footnote citation. So going back over those, how to do those citations is very important, because there are going to be at least 3, if not 4 questions on the final where I will give you information, expect you to write it out SPL style. Any of the information that you would not know, I will give to you. So for example, abbreviations of journal titles or commentary series. And so you might not know that information, so I'll provide that for you. But as far as the examples, I might put it in the wrong order, might give you more information than you need. So make sure you have down those. I'm not going to do like really, really tricky ones of, like cite Josephus. We didn't even talk about that. It's going to be like a commentary, a journal article, a book. I'm not going to do anything where you would have to do electronic, right? Copy a website or anything like that. It's just going to be a standard journal article, commentary, or a book. So know those, have those down. You should know what the different parts of an argument are, not just the names of the different parts, but what they are as well. These are the four parts of an argument. I might ask you a question like, what is a warrant in terms of argument? Right, so no, a warrant is what connects your claims and your evidence. I might ask you, I'm trying to think of a multiple choice question. It'd probably end up being a short answer question, or a multiple choice question where I would say, like, what is a warrant? A, the connection between your claim and your evidence. B, the information you use to support your argument. C, important limitations on your argument. All right. And so if you know a warrant is how your evidence and your claim are connected, you should be fine. You should know the types of false reasoning. Again, I'm going to, we went through a list of 8. You should know those. You should be able to identify an example of those. I would, in an example of those, like a multiple choice question, I would do it where it would be, I would try to do it in such a way that it would be inherently obvious what type it is, if you know what the different types are. So I might have a question that says, what is an ad hominem, what is an ad hominem line of reasoning, right? And where you're attacking the person, not the argument. And so, that it might be something like that, where it's a short answer, or it might be where I give you an example, say, which of the following is an ad hominem, right? And so if it attacks the person or says something about the person, that's the one you would want to pay attention to. In circular reasoning, things like the Bible is true because it says it's true, well, that's circular reasoning. And so knowing the difference between the types, being able to identify examples. I'm not going to ask you to provide examples, right? So, but I'm going to say, which of the following would be circular reasoning, right? And it would be something like the Bible is true because it says it's true. And so it would be obvious if you know what an ad hominem is. It's not that, it's not attacking the person. If it's a non sequitur, non sequitur is that the conclusion doesn't follow from the evidence, and circular reasoning. False dilemma, again, it would be something like, if John 8 doesn't belong in the Gospel of John, then the whole Bible is untrue. All right? That's a false dilemma. That's not true. The other 4, coincidence, not causation. The straw figure, basic generalization, the false analogy. Understanding what those are, being able to identify examples of them. If you need to go back and look those over, that was in the argument, constructing an argument class. You should be able to talk about the different parts of the paper. Might be a question simply like, what are the 3 parts of the paper? Introduction, body, conclusion. It might also be a question like, what do you try to do in your introduction? And so if you know the parts of paper, what they're for, you'll be in good shape. And then the last thing I want to emphasize, that's not to say don't pay attention to some of those other things, but these are the ones that I really wanted to emphasize to pay attention to, would be what a thesis statement is and why it's important. This would be most likely a short answer question. Why is a thesis statement important? What is a thesis statement? Would probably not be a multiple choice question of which of the following is a thesis statement. Well, I mean, they would all could possibly be thesis statements. So it's most likely going to be a short answer question. And so if you're able to answer either of those or both, right, there might be a short answer question: what is the thesis statement and why is it important? Again, this isn't to say to not pay attention to any of the other terms, but these are the ones and these are the kind of things I'm looking for you to be able to talk about or to write about or to recognize examples of for the final. And that's basically it. You have an hour and 50 minutes. Get done before that time is through, you're welcome to leave. But are there any questions, anything we've talked about, anything that I didn't address that you might want to ask about with respect to the final? All right, if not, then I will see you in a week. And if anything comes up between now and next Wednesday, feel free to get in contact with me about it.